Welcome to the Paying It Forward podcast, episode 10.
A mentor relationship does not have to, the ones I have are pretty much formal. These are through organizations. We are paired up. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be somebody, who you feel comfortable popping into their office or dropping by their desk and asking a question.
Hi, and welcome to the Paying It Forward podcast. My name is Steve Richards. Thank you for listening. I believe if you want to attain a C-level position in your career, you need to understand what it takes to achieve that level of leadership. When you have access to successful entrepreneurs and senior executives who want to help you develop the skills and traits to become a great leader, it's like having your own mastermind group to mentor and guide you. In a nutshell, that's our podcast. In just a few moments, we'll sit down with Kevin Laird. Kevin is the Director of Advisory Services for the Oracle Governance, Risk, and Compliance practice at KPMG. My conversation with Kevin was so good and so deep when it came to mentoring that we decided to split the conversation into two episodes. In this episode, we specifically talk about mentoring and the two organizations, STEM Advantage and Thrive, and how he devotes time to helping the younger generation navigate through not only school and setting themselves up for graduation, but also how they transition into the workforce and all the mentoring that he can do to help them through understanding and learning their career and their career aspirations. A lot of the information, insight, and wisdom that Kevin provides in this episode is applicable across the board, whether you're just entering the workforce or you've been in the workforce for quite some time. So there's a lot of nuggets in here that I think are very applicable. And with that, here is my conversation with Kevin. Kevin, it is an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
I'd really like to spend some time with you on mentoring, I think, from a couple of perspectives. One, I think that as you entered the workforce and during your time in the workforce, you have either sought out or had mentors mentoring you, formally and informally. And I also think that you've done that in the same. But I'm really interested in you collectively, Kevin Laird collectively as a whole, mentoring in general. And you can go anywhere you want with this. You can start, career-wise. You can start non-career-wise. The amount of work I think you do with STEM, I'm fascinated. Your passion for mentoring is so strong. I'm really curious how you just walk me through how you got into it, where you focus, and I may not even ask a second question.
Okay.
Tell me all about how you started the whole mentoring thing. How were you, when you were brought in, how were you mentored and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Well, honestly, I don't think I had a lot of mentoring.
Oh, really?
And that's that. Well, and that's one of the reasons I'm passionate about it now.
Wow.
I fell into this line of work at a good time where somebody like myself that didn't have necessarily the formal education was able to, learn and do it. Yeah, I didn't have much guidance up until then. Now, my first job, I had a fabulous technical mentor. And, he saw somebody that was willing to learn. He had a lot to teach, and I soaked it all up.
That's great.
And I still keep in touch with him to this day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciated it in the moment, but I didn't see it for what it was and how I could use that elsewhere, in my career. So I didn't get necessarily, as I moved into, let's say, management, I kind of figured it out on my own. I figured out a lot of things on my own. And at some point in time, I woke up and said, I wish that people had told me some of these things that I've learned now the hard way.
Yeah, sure. I agree.
And that applies to, people that are, currently going through, whether they're currently, looking at what college they want to go to or if they want to go to college, to people that are, in their last couple of years of college and trying to figure out what do I want to do after college, to people that are, in their career and trying to figure out what do I want to do next. Maybe it's simply a function of being old enough now. I have enough to say.
Yeah.
Maybe there's also a component. I don't have children, so maybe this is my outlet for providing guidance to the next generation.
Well, there is something to be said for being older and having one or two gray hairs along the way in the experience. That certainly helps. I admire you greatly, and I told you this when we chatted before. I admire you greatly for the level of effort and passion you have for mentoring, particularly the outside, just the younger folks that you're mentoring along the way. I'd like to learn a little bit. Maybe tell us how you got into that. I mean, obviously, what drove you to that, but what got you into that, and maybe describe that relationship. Maybe pick in your mind one or two, where the mentoring was something where I always considered mentoring to be something where someone is the teacher, someone's a student, and you have to find that level of where you're going to meet and then kind of work with each other to get to some future. And I'm really curious what your whole process, your whole mindset is on delivering that with somebody.
So mentoring for me started off in the workplace, and it was really, mentoring people that were working for me or on my team. And then maybe some other people that weren't necessarily on my team might start, coming and asking me questions because I had, experience or, some level of knowledge in an area. It wasn't until I was working at Toyota Financial Services that I really got formally involved in mentoring outside of the workplace. And a lot of that is, Toyota's a great contributor to the community. Obviously miss having them here in Los Angeles, but they had a number of different programs I could participate in. And the first one I did was working with, I think it was Carson High School, their students there. And they were, a lot of them were, first in their family potentially to go to college. A lot of them were facing decisions, they're in their junior or senior year and they're thinking about maybe going to college. And in some cases, their parents are absolutely supportive. And in some cases, their parents are asking, well, why do you want to go to school for 4 more years? Because you can go make $20 an hour in your cousin's garage right now and, be contributing to the family. And those are the sorts of decisions, these kids are making.
Those are tough.
Yeah. And, these kids also don't have a template. For me, while I didn't necessarily get a lot of guidance in my youth, me going to college was a no-brainer. Both my parents had gone to college. It was just, that was just kind of part of the expectation. You go to junior high school, you go to high school, you go to college. Yep. I didn't know what I wanted to do once I got there, but at the very least, that was, that was not a question I had to answer. For a lot of these, people in high school, it is a question they have to answer. And there is no, they have very, there's limited resources for them to go say, how did you do this? And for a lot of people, it's scary because it's the unknown. It's simply saying, look, this is not as scary as it may seem, just because it's called the University of California, the Cal State University, or whatever, everybody going in there is not that different than you.
Right.
They all have the same fears. They all have the same worries, the same insecurities. They're all going to work through it, and you will too. It's a normal path that many people have trod before you. So just kind of being able to give some of these students hopefully some level of comfort that this is, they're not setting themselves up for failure.
Yeah, that wisdom and that guidance is huge. So what are some of the organizations you're involved in? Because I'm curious, Carson High was a great one. What's another group outside of Carson?
Yeah, so when I was at Toyota, there was a group of people. Some of the people that started STEM Advantage were there, some of the leaders that started STEM Advantage. That is a local, I'd say, California group, not it's I'd say based in LA. It's been expanding, to other CSU campuses. They focus on CSU campuses. Okay. They're focusing on people that are, first in their family, have challenges, going to college. It's part of it's a scholarship, and part of it is there's a scholarship component and then a mentoring component. And depending on where you catch these people, in the process, some of them they're trying to figure out their first year. How do I register for classes? How do I, I'm taking my first final exam, how do I move from, what's usually a pretty structured high school experience to a less structured, or you have to be more responsible for your own time, your own actions in college. And then as they move through college, it's, probably sophomore year, certainly junior year, you need to be thinking about internships. And how do I go about getting an internship? And then obviously, your final year, you're looking at how do I get a job? Getting your first job out of college is not easy.
No, I don't. Not certainly not today.
Yeah,
It's
certainly not
gotten
today.
much tougher today, especially given COVID, pre-COVID, COVID, and then hopefully post-COVID here. It's a lot just to find anything with the way the unemployment's been working around and running around.
Yeah. And the second organization I work with is called Thrive Scholars, and that's a national organization. And there's also a scholarship component there. They also do some high school level activities where they'll I'm not sure exactly what they call it, but it's like a summer boot camp, I think, the year before college.
Oh,
So
cool.
give people kind of give students a taste of what college will be like, and then pair them up with mentoring, through their college years. It's a similar experience, when the mentoring I do with Sem Advantage. I mean, it depends on where you are in your college career. I mean, I find like freshmen, maybe even a little bit sophomores, they're trying to figure out school, and then pretty soon, you don't talk about that stuff anymore, and you start talking about, what are they doing in, how do I get an internship, or, and the big stressor is the last year where they got to graduate and they got to go find a job,
Yep.
so they have the regular stresses of wrapping up their last semester or quarter, depending on where you are. Plus they're out trying to figure out, how do I do a resume? How do I do it? How do I interview? Where do I go? What does that process look like, and how do I stand out from others?
So in this, I'll have you maybe think of one or two people, an example of a situation where you're in this mentoring window long enough where you see somebody go in who's just a deer in headlights,
Mm-hmm.
and they come out the backside super confident. Obviously, the education will be the education. They'll get the knowledge, and they'll be smarter at going out than when they came in. Maybe think in your background or over the course of being involved in both STEM and Thrive, as well as Carson. Do you have any stories or experiences where someone came in and wasn't really sure what they were trying to do or accomplish, or just were deer in a headlight, and then all of a sudden you really take the time, because what you're really good at, and I know this from personal experience, you're really good at sitting down and listening and then articulating back and forth what the goal is and then the steps and processes to get to that goal. I'm really curious if there's one or two examples where you say, listen, this guy was this way or this girl was this way, and at the end it was like, wow, I'm learning from them, kind of thing.
So it doesn't happen all of a sudden, or at least it hasn't happened all of a sudden in my experience.
Okay.
It happens over time. And
Yep.
I would say the transformation that I love to see, and there's a woman I'm working with right now. I've been working with her for probably about a year now. And, when we first started, it was all about, classes and stuff. And, and the theme here is developing confidence. She was not necessarily confident in, how she was approaching some of her classes, how she was doing her studying, how she was, how she was basically, managing her time, for example. And we don't have those discussions anymore. Those things it's not like a light goes on. It's just they kind of go away because now she has it handled. She knows how to, she knows how to deal with this stuff. Similarly, there's a guy who recently graduated, is starting his first job here in a couple of months, I believe. And I caught him a little bit later in his college career. And for him, it was, we were mostly talking about, job search, how to get into professional experience. So, I was encouraging him to get involved in every kind of, he was interested in technology, being a programmer, every kind of tech opportunity he could. And he was passionate about it. He was out doing developing his own mobile apps, and he was doing work for the school, the school newspaper website. And he was, going to some of these like Google Camp things, and then we figured out, and how do you leverage that into, something that's going to attract a company to hire you. And he's going to be starting sometime soon. A lot of times it's about that they're looking for somebody, or maybe they're not looking for somebody, but I think where I can help is assuring them that everybody goes through this, so that their fears are no different than anybody else's fears. They're no different than the fears I had, their worries. And positioning them to set themselves apart, whether it's, how do I study? How do I finally learned how to study when I was probably in my third year of college, so if I can help somebody learn, just some basic stuff in the first year, they're already ahead. If I can, I had no idea how to apply for a job when when I first got out of school or what people were interested. If I can help somebody, work on that, make sure that they are comfortable with failure, because I mean, you and I know, job searches are, no, 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 until you get to yes, right?
Yep.
And it's not a fun process, and
No.
especially when it's your first time.
Yep.
I was thinking about, your earlier question about why I do this, and it's actually thinking about that a little bit more, and I have thought about this in the past, but frankly, I find it a bit of a privilege to work with some of these people. So one of my students right now, or one of the students that I mentor right now, she's, immigrant family, single mother, who I believe works at a fast food restaurant. And she is, and my student is going to school to be she's very interested in, she's a comp sci major, and she's very interested in, getting into hardcore programming, like hardware level programming.
Wow.
And I just find that journey so impressive, and so being able to work with people like that, that's a big draw. It's a privilege.
Well, and it's a very different journey than her mom has.
Yeah, well, but they're also the people that come from, know the value of hard work.
Yeah.
And, not to get back into the previous discussion about, what I look for, but frankly, that's one of the things I look for. I mean,
Oh, sure.
Most of these students I have, I'd hire them in a heartbeat, simply because of how much, work they've had to put in their lives.
That's great.
To get to where they are.
Well, the old adage is, nothing beats hard work, right? But work is hard. And, if you go into it realizing they don't call it hard work for no reason, right? It's hard work for a reason. But people sometimes, I find, it's just across the swath, and I'm not trying to categorize people, but it's funny when every once in a while, you'll be put in a position where you realize someone's working crazy and they're doing great. And there are people that aren't working that hard and they're complaining. You're thinking, well, let me just tell you a story about this person. Whether they came from nothing or abundance, they still have, they might get a different break along the way, but they still have to put in the effort. And the more effort you put in, I think, and it's not about quantity or, effort's more about quality. It's really more about working, smart and efficient, and learning efficiently and effectively and applying all of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, and to be clear on that point, I mean, people that work 80 hours a week to get 40 hours of work done, that's not impressive.
That's not impressive whatsoever. In fact, you might only be able to do that for about 2 or 3 weeks before I'll probably fire you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's just inefficient. What about the mentoring process has surprised you? Is there something, like I had somebody say, it's the responsibility of the mentee to drive the mentor-mentee process. And I thought that was fascinating. I'm curious if there's any foundational components you have or anything that surprised you along the way.
Well, every time I take on a new mentee, I do a level set. I tell them that a lot of the responsibility for the relationship is on them.
Oh, good.
And however, what I commit to them is A, being available to them, B, being a safe space to ask whatever it is that they want.
That's good.
And C, at a minimum, I will proactively reach out to them on, some specified regular basis, let's say monthly. Because one of the things I do find is, and this is, I think, where mentors have to be careful. You can say, hey, it's the responsibility of the mentee to drive the process, but a lot of them may not know what to ask and may be shy about when to ask. I mean, again, a lot of this comes down to whether it's your first year in school, developing the confidence in how to deal with that, or you're out of school, and a lot of what we talked about is putting yourself out there, having the confidence to put yourself out there, whether it's going to school, going out and getting that first job, asking for, putting yourself out there for that promotion by volunteering for things. I mean, a lot of this is about having confidence to put yourself out there. And if you're trying to develop that confidence, it's not necessarily fair to expect that on day one from your brand new mentee. So you do have to, I think, make some commitments on the mentor. I think it's important for the mentor to make some commitments in terms of making it a safe place, being available, and proactively reaching out, because otherwise, a month goes by, another
Yep.
month goes by, you haven't talked to, and you find yourself maybe talking once a year. You haven't developed a rapport or a relationship with them, because even if you talk on a monthly basis and there's not much going on, you can at least develop some of that relationship and trust, so that when it comes time to have a more serious discussion, you've laid the groundwork for that.
I think there's a lot to be said for just touching base,
Mm-hmm.
but I do agree. I think the mentee has to sort of drive and own it, because at the end of the day, it's their life,
Yeah.
their direction.
They need to be able to express, like where they have questions, where they have things that they feel that they need to work on. I
Yeah.
had a mentee a few years ago. She was great. Probably, similar story. She was, I think, yeah, she was, her family, I think, was in Guam. She
Hmm.
was here going to school.
Oh wow.
And she's since graduated and she's working in technology. She was doing all the things right. She was doing everything you would want, but she didn't think she was doing anything.
Oh wow.
I mean, most of my conversations with her were like, "You are doing exactly everything you should be doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep on that trajectory. You're on the right path. You're asking the right questions. You're putting yourself out there. You're doing the right things." And she hadn't seen the results yet, so she just didn't know.
Hmm.
Every mentee is different, right?
Yeah.
Has different
Wow.
needs.
That's what I was asking earlier. I was trying to figure out if there was some common core. It doesn't sound like. I mean, it is definitely unique. Every relationship is, but foundationally, the components are the same. You're trying to instill confidence, get them to own
Yeah,
it, let them
yeah,
step up, and then kind of drive the process, and then use you as a very clear sounding board. I like the safe space component of that quite a bit, because someone's got to be able to say, "Look, I just don't. I want to just vent, or I want to, whatever."
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's really great. What about the mentoring process have I not asked you that you want to make sure people understand? And think of it maybe from the standpoint of, you're out there in the backyard, you got two or three of your mentees together, and you're saying, look, this is really foundational. Given it's unique per person, but I'm trying to figure out if there's anything that I haven't asked you about the mentor side of it versus what you see on the mentee side of it.
I would encourage them all, as they move into the workforce, let's say, is look for other mentors that they can
Yeah,
develop relationships
that's a
with.
great answer.
And I think I may have said this earlier, but a mentor relationship does not have to, the ones I have are pretty much formal. I mean, these are through organizations. We are paired up. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be somebody, who you feel comfortable popping into their office or dropping by their desk and asking a question.
Hmm.
Use some, people that you can use as a sounding board, whether they're within your company, outside of your company. Being able to leverage other people's experience is a I guess what they call a force multiplier. I mean, it's going to
Yeah,
accelerate things for you.
yeah, I agree.
This is where, early on I said, to a large degree, I figured out a lot of things on my own. And after years of figuring out things on my own, I realized that wasn't tremendously efficient.
Yeah, it's true. I think you said something in there I think is really important. I think the informal side of it, being able to drop in and sort of find a commonality to start with
Yeah.
somebody, and then sort of build and bridge is good.
The guy that I told you that was my first mentor,
Hmm.
there was never like, nobody ever paired us up and said, oh, hey, he's going to be your mentor. It just organically happened.
Yeah.
And I put that label on it. I'm not sure he would even put that label on it.
Hmm. That's interesting, because so far the folks, when I've asked this question, it's been very similar. The same general construct of an answer was, most of it never started off formally. It was just more like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I could use some advice. What do you think? And then obviously there's a likability factor. Each person has to like
Of
each
course.
other, but
Yeah.
trust each other with the ability to have an open conversation, that they're not going to be judged on the question, or it's not going to be held against them down the road somewhere. I think that
Right.
becomes huge. So I do think that a lot of this stuff happens organically.
Yeah.
I think the formal stuff like STEM and Thrive, I think, are terrific. And those, I think, make great sense.
Yeah.
I think more people need to be aware coming in that there are opportunities and people who will be more than happy and glad to sit with you and give you some advice or thoughts and suggestions, especially if they're in the same discipline. Those in a cross discipline will give you a really nice view from a different perspective, which can be very helpful. But then I think as you started to touch on, I think as you get in there, whether, like, let's say you came out of STEM or Thrive or wherever and you got in the workforce and you started figuring out the informal side of it, I think at some point there's an opportunity for you to turn around and say, okay, there's more people coming in. We got to kind of keep this train rolling, because I think at that point it is a multiplier effect. I think people have come in, had nothing. Let's say they've learned something. They've gotten in there, they've taken that learning, they've turned around and said, here, let me help this guy. It's kind of the 360.
Yeah. Well, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there's a saying in medicine or, surgery, like, watch one, do one, teach one. That's how you learn something.
Oh, I like that.
Well, I would prefer my surgeon to do more than one before he does it on me. But the point is, and I've seen this in my own career, because you really know a subject when you have to teach it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, mentoring is not necessarily, a formal, is not a formal teaching process. But when you are able to start mentoring other people, not only is it giving back, it is you're also really developing an additional level of knowledge to be able to articulate the things that you've learned.
Agreed.
One of the students I have right now, I was speaking about her earlier. She has started mentoring freshmen. Year ago she had all these same questions. And I think it's great. It is absolutely awesome. Fabulous. It is absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Kevin, thank you very much for your time today. This has been great and fabulous. The amount of information that folks will be able to take away from this is just fascinating. So, and the wisdom, the insights, terrific. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Steve. This has been a real pleasure. I don't actually get to sit down and talk about this. Really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you.
He is Kevin Laird, the Director of Advisory Services for the Oracle Governance, Risk, and Compliance practice at KPMG. And during this episode, you had an opportunity to hear Kevin discuss how he has formally partnered with the mentee in both the STEM Advantage organization as well as the Thrive organization. You also had an opportunity to hear Kevin's thoughts on the responsibility of the mentor and the mentee. Kevin noted two organizations, STEM Advantage and Thrive. And if you happen to know of any college students or happen to be the parent of a college student, these are two organizations that I think could be very helpful to the younger generation as they are looking for mentors and coming into the marketplace. Finally, most of what Kevin talked about is transferable, whether you're in college, just post-college starting your career, or been in your career for quite some time. This information and more is in the show notes section of this episode on our website. Simply go to www.lessonsfromthecsuite.com/episode 10. You can follow our podcast for free on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Libsyn, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast player. If you happen to think this is a 5-star worthy podcast and you leave a written review, I'll be sure to mention your name in an upcoming episode as a small way to say thank you. If you're not yet following this podcast, please go to www.lessonsfromthecsuite.com, sign up or subscribe, it's free, and you'll receive a PDF on various ways you can pay it forward every day. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, any guest suggestions, or any feedback in general, please send us an email at feedback@lessonsfromthecsuite.com or go to our website and submit a message directly. Thank you for listening. Until next time.